so I originally had this video planned to be released next in my schedule last week. However, as we have seen and previous video reports, including mine, indicate, the Ukrainians have decided that they'll just start winning regardless of the circumstances. Because, like always, they keep forcing me, or everyone else for that matter, to update their scripts by just winning faster than I or anyone else can write. The advance on Kherson is progressing steadily, while First Guard's tank army got absolutely bodied by the Kharkiv counteroffensive, with some reports estimating as high as 55% casualties, with equipment losses even higher. But as excellent as this news is, complacency kills war efforts more than any other factor. Russia is looking more and more like a cornered animal. The extreme right in Russia is repeating the same old refrain of fascists throughout history. How could our mighty army fail? We must have been betrayed. We've been stabbed in the back. You know, for a country supposedly denazifying somewhere, I feel like using their exact talking points is a bit of a giveaway of what your real intentions are. They blame Putin for the failure and feel more extreme methods are required. A war of genocide to achieve total victory with whatever means they have in hand. Putin, meanwhile, mentioning him, has been called to resign by over 50 members of the Duma, while the head of the Communist Party is calling for the opposite, and he is calling for Russia to officially declare war in order to mobilize the full might of Russia's manpower and economy, with the hopes of somehow stabilizing the situation. Putin is in a very serious political and economic situation, and with the Ukrainians now achieving victories that even the Russian media and Russian public can't deny, he is really up the creek. That particular creep, and he hasn't got a paddle, let alone anything else he can use. If the Ukrainian offensive continues, which at the moment it looks like it will, and if it succeeds, which is looking ever more likely as news comes in, with some units reporting that they are within visual distance of Kherson itself, Crimea is under threat. In fact, call-up orders for military-aged males have already been issued inside the state of Crimea itself, and military-aged males are forbidden from leaving the peninsula. So obviously, they perceive Crimea as directly in danger. And this is the place they started this entire war to protect almost a decade ago. Russia cannot allow Ukraine to cross the Tatar Ditch and into the peninsula under any circumstances. Black Sea Fleet would be within range of deadly anti-ship weaponry and face the same fate as Moskva if they do. And no number of bots or Russia is actually winning talk will change that calculation. The Russians are scared shitless. Losing their fleet base, losing their airfields, losing what they now consider official Russian territory is beyond the pale. They would not let it stand. Putin will almost certainly declare war if Crimea is threatened, because the strategic, economic and political cost of losing it is far more devastating than whatever political backlash he may face at home. So while I'm personally happy that Ukraine is succeeding, I want to reiterate and make it very clear. This war is not over. Not by a long shot. In fact, I will borrow the words of Winston Churchill when he so famously said, "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. It is, though, perhaps, the end of the beginning." And thus, Ukraine needs our help now more than ever to make that victory happen. And what is the best way of making that victory happen? What can we use winter and the mud season to buy time for? What can we use a period of relative calm to consolidate with? Given the Ukrainians' deficiency in numbers should a full-scale war break out, they need force multipliers. They need something that will give them the decisive edge, the ability to strike targets with precision, on time and on target, with devastating effect. What Ukraine needs is to control the skies. And today, we will discuss how to go about that very goal, with the ultimate questions being what and how. Now, the answer to these is of course conjecture. It's theory crafting and speculation. It's also an open invitation to making wild and outlandish wish lists that have absolutely no basis in reality other than it would be cool. And yes, while 3 squadrons of F-22s and an entire wing of F-35s would solve this problem within a few hours, as well as being exceptionally cool, it's not actually helpful to the discussion because it's not within the realms of possibility. At least not right now. What this video will aim to do, and its relative scope, is similar to that of my friendly colleague and countryman Perrin. Namely, that when discussing defense acquisitions, it is dependent on the needs of your forces, what your ultimate tactical and strategic goals are, and the most economically practicable way to achieve those goals. Now, it's never as easy as that, as politics always plays a part in this, as does money. And given that war is the single most political act mankind can undertake, that being the pursuit of political policy by force of arms with the entire resources of the state, how achievable the contents of this video actually are will be entirely dependent on the governments involved, questions about Ukraine's ability to cover the costs of purchase and operation either now or in the future, and whether or not the geopolitical risk is proportionate to the reward, given that too much international interference may result in, well, yeah. So, to start the video off, we need to set the scene by outlining Ukraine's immediate and long-term objectives, the primary threats they need to counter, and the requirements of their forces. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Atlas VPN, and right now, Atlas VPN is running a huge discount. It means you can get a 3-year subscription for just $1.99 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. But this is a limited-time offer, so get your deal by clicking the link in the video description below. VPNs are the first line of defense when browsing online, and Atlas VPN has a big focus on your security. It blocks ads, malware, malicious links, and trackers while notifying you when someone tries to steal your data. It keeps your Google searches private and untracked, ensuring you surf the net safely. And with just one subscription, you can protect all of your devices. Combine that with today's special offer, and you simply have the best VPN deal on the market right now. And those savings do not stop there. By changing server locations and hunting around, Atlas gives you the opportunity to get the best deals from all over the world. Plus, this location-changing feature lets you access geo-locked content on all of your favorite services like Netflix, Crunchyroll, Stan, whatever. And being an Aussie, trust me, this is the biggest factor for me because media availability down here is completely awful. So remember, Atlas VPN is running a huge discount, and it means you can get a 3-year subscription for just $1.99 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. But it is a limited time offer, so get your deal by clicking the link in the video description below. Plus, it helps out my channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you to Atlas VPN, and on with the video. The air war in Ukraine has been an incredibly fluid affair, with different threats coming from all axes. The evolution of drone warfare, the increasing lethality of SAM systems, and of course Russia's more advanced avionics and weapon systems in their aircraft. The ability of the Ukrainians to exert air superiority is therefore very limited, if not impossible, without extensive support from their ground-based Integrated Air Defense System, or IADS. This has resulted in the creative guerrilla war tactics I have discussed in my previous videos, which you should go check out if you haven't already. The fact of the matter is, though, that the Ukrainians are at a decisive disadvantage in their ability to do battle in the air. They have only survived by practicing airspace denial and getting hits in where possible. In terms of air superiority capabilities, the simple fact is the Ukrainians are absolutely incapable of seizing airspace from the Russians unless their ground troops do it first so they can put their SAMnet forward. With the current equipment they have, they just can't take airspace without support from the ground. And given that this war has morphed from the short, rapid campaign by Russia and the incidental counterattack of recent days, it's really gone from that into a long-term, full-scale conventional conflict with a grinding offensive back and forth on the ground. And so the entire outlook of the Ukrainian air strategy is, first and foremost, to secure their airspace and then steadily expand their area of control. And to that end, they have several major hurdles to overcome. The first major one being the Russian cruise missile threat. While the Ukrainians have had significant success in shooting down standoff weapons breaching their air perimeter, with their S-300 SAM systems and MiG-29 intercepts, the probability of kill of those systems, or their PK rates, are not as high as they need to be to completely neutralize the threat. And while the accuracy of the Russian missiles has been everything from passable to lackluster to hilarious, they are still getting through with enough frequency and with enough volume to seriously impair Ukraine's strategic capabilities, both military and economic. Fixed installations such as headquarters, fuel dumps, munitions dumps, factories for war material, and most importantly in this case, airfields, are at extreme risk from the cruise missile threat, and until it can be neutralized completely, the ability of Ukraine to set up more extensive facilities to operate and maintain the complex weapon systems that NATO operates will be severely limited. The next major issue is, of course, the one that they have already begun taking the necessary steps to counter: the Russian IADS and SAM threat. The AGM-88 HARM has made its appearance on the wings of MiG-29s and Su-27s, having been jury-rigged to work with Russian systems. The most practical solution to how the Ukrainians have managed to do this dates back to tests conducted on the Fulcrum and Flanker platforms found in former Warsaw Pact countries and NATO-aligned nations who have purchased later models of airframe from Sukhoi and MiG. Without going too much into technicality, the HARM has the ability to be fired in a pre-planned mode, which can be coded on the ground by technicians to seek and destroy a particular emitter type after being fired. All it would need is power and a release trigger. However, it is also possible, as we have seen GPS systems in use by the Ukrainians, that they have managed to use the HARM in GPS target of opportunity mode by programming a GPS coordinate, feeding it to the missile, and then the missile is going active upon launch of the aircraft, finding and blasting the nearest emitter it sees. Whatever the methodology, which involves 3D printing a bracket, by the way, found this photo, it looks really cool. The Ukrainians have now been conducting SEED missions with a heavy focus around the Kherson area in coordination with their ongoing counteroffensive. But SEED stands for Suppression of Enemy Air Defense. What they need more than ever is DEED, which I'm sure the intellectuals among you have worked out, stands for Destruction of Enemy Air Defense. The ability to coordinate the suppression of the search radars with weapon systems that can strike a SAM battery accurately from standoff range at minimal risk to the launch aircraft. That is what they need. And moving on to the most obvious threat and the subsequent operational requirement is, of course, the air superiority threat. As it stands, the Russians have several major advantages in this area. First, they have far more air superiority fighters available to them. Second, these fighters are of higher quality compared to the current Ukrainian hardware. And finally, third, given the Russians are on the offensive, or they at least were at time of writing, this has since changed somewhat, and they are able to establish S-400 and Buk batteries close to the front lines, and they have active Fox 3 active radar air-to-air missiles in the R-77 Adder series of missiles, they can operate at maximum altitude and maintain a constant combat air patrol with integrated AWACS support, able to track Ukrainian aircraft. Due to these factors, they have a rather nasty look-down, shoot-down capability with an electro-optical tracking system and a very powerful pulse Doppler radar mounted in their Su-35 series of fighters. And that's not even going into their maneuverability and their short-range infrared missile capabilities, which are, despite all their flaws, some of the best in the world. As I said in my previous air war videos, while the Russians suck at higher technology, their raw mechanical engineering is second to none, and you dismiss it at your peril. And finally, what ultimately becomes the most vital capability of all, if all these other threats can be mitigated or even eliminated, that leaves one mission left: the ability to efficiently, effectively, and decisively conduct close air support and interdiction sorties against Russian ground forces. Simply put, clearing the skies allows for warheads on foreheads, which, if the past 20 years are any indicator, NATO systems are absolutely brilliant at. Now, there are of course a million different other factors in modern war, which a more holistic understanding requires extensive background knowledge in both systems and logistics, but overall, these are the fundamental strategic and tactical problems Ukraine, and by extension Ukraine's military-industrial complex throughout NATO, to contend with. And when confronted with a problem, the best method to solve it is to break it down into simple tasks to complete in sequence, to ultimately achieve the desired outcome. Now, granted, in warfare, the other team is trying to do the same, but as has been demonstrated over recent days, the Russians aren't exactly knocking it out of the park when it comes to adapting to changing conditions in the battle space, even when they are the ones with the initiative. And when compared to the combined economic and military strength of the free world, their ability to deploy new capabilities is decisively limited. So, in short, the Ukrainians need to secure a portion of their territory and greater airspace to be practically impregnable to Russian aircraft, cruise missiles, and indirect fire. After securing this territory, they need to construct, refurbish, or otherwise establish airfields that can support more complex weapon systems and their associated infrastructure. While they are doing that in the interim, they need weapon systems that they can use to influence the battle, keep them in the fight, while also being able to operate in their present dispersed, poor quality conditions. They then need the ability to degrade and eventually dismantle the Russian integrated air defense system, and finally, the ability to seize air superiority from the Russians in aerial combat via the use of superior air-to-air platforms, paving the way for the ability to fly ground attack sorties of 3 primary variations: DEED, destruction of enemy air defense, close air support, and interdiction, with the ultimate goal being the ability to utilize standoff weapons of their own against Russian S-400s and forward air bases, neutralizing the air threat entirely. To that end, they will need weapon systems to achieve that goal, weapon systems we can train them on, supply them with, and reliably deploy and employ. And we will start with the cornerstone, the bedrock, the base upon which we will build the rest of their capabilities.
America, fuck yeah! Coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah, America!
Of all the systems that Ukraine needs right now in regards to air defense, it is this system above all else that we should be prioritizing. The Ukrainian integrated air defense has been functioning decently enough, but the latest models of Patriot would make the critical difference in cordoning off airspace from Russian cruise missile threats. Since its early teething problems in the Gulf War and Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Patriot has now developed into an absolutely lethal system, capable of hitting just about any target, whether it be an aircraft, cruise missile, or even a medium-range ballistic missile threat. Equipped with an AN/MPQ-65A search and acquisition radar, the Patriot system is able to detect pretty much everything except the latest generation of stealth technology up to incredible, and classified, ranges across a 360-degree arc. Its phased active electronic scan array allows for a highly focused beam in acquisition mode, meaning that jamming and countermeasures are more or less ineffective once it has lock. And once it has that lock, there is an incredible amount of democracy at its disposal. Each Patriot battery at nominal strength has 6 Transport Erector Launchers, or TELs, containing between 8 to 16 missiles each, all linked into the AN/MSQ-104 Advanced Engagement Control Station. Once a target is detected, the launch commander can choose the type of missile he wants to engage with. Often, Patriot batteries have older PAC-2 missiles with much larger warheads for anti-aircraft missions, while the smaller, faster PAC-3 warheads, which are more accurate, are reserved for cruise missiles or ballistic threats. In any case, once a target is confirmed hostile and release authority is given, they can launch one of the fastest and most accurate weapon systems on the planet with pinpoint precision, practically impossible to defend or jam at ranges of over 100 miles. Once fired, these missiles are guided onto the target by the aforementioned radar until they reach intercept, at which point the missile can either direct impact the threat with a kinetic kill, or detonate a proximity warhead containing tungsten fragments capable of shredding anything it hits to component parts. And what's really incredible is, the latest software updates available to Patriot allow it to data link integrate with all major NATO radar and air defense systems, primarily the NASAMS medium-range air defense system already in use by Ukraine, but also other various toys in use by NATO nations, which would allow Ukraine to integrate NATO support assets into their integrated air defense system without directly drawing NATO into the conflict. But the best part of all of this is how it fits into Ukraine's unique air defense strategy, their operational tempo, and their overall strategic setup. Because a full-size Patriot battery can be broken down, packed up, moved, and redeployed in under an hour. This weapon system is the first major step in securing airspace for Ukraine, and they need it in order to establish a base able to support the complex infrastructure and weapon systems they will need to turn this war completely around in their favor. But an IADS is not built overnight. It takes time to establish, and the Ukrainians need to be able to contest and defend airspace while striking targets right now. Their offensive on Kherson and further operations in the south are not going to go the way they want them to go to the extent they could, unless they have air support. And they need to be able to launch that support from the bases they have available. Which leads into this. Now, I am sure that some of you in the comments are confused or surprised at my choice here, but it is based on a number of reasons. At present, the Ukrainian inventory of aircraft, namely MiG-29s and the Sukhoi models of 27, 24 and 25s, are older Soviet designs, and quite frankly, they are out of date. The fact the Ukrainian Air Force has managed to hang in there this long and have not only survived, but are now fighting back, is an incredible feat of arms which I swear I'm going to write a book about once this war is over and hard data comes to light. But the advantage that the Russians possess in terms of raw capability in their aircraft, weapon systems and raw numbers is something that the Ukrainians can't compete with directly. As such, they need an advanced multi-role fighter with exceptional air-to-air capabilities, next-generation sensors, data link integration, and the ability to deploy smart munitions against ground targets. Now, there are a few aircraft better suited for doing some of, if not all of these things. One of them is showing up later in this video. But as stated before, a modern jet fighter requires extensive infrastructure to support it. A secure and established airspace, trained personnel, equipment and systems unique to each airframe requiring their own logistics chain for each aspect of the aircraft's operation. These take time to set up, and in the current strategic and tactical environment Ukraine is operating in, until Patriot comes online in conjunction with the rest of their integrated air defense to secure a safe basing area, the Ukrainians don't have the capability to support the new systems they need and in sufficient enough quantity. But they still need to fly missions and contest airspace against superior fighter opposition. They need something to bridge the gap between their future capability and their capability right now. Enter the Flat Pack Fighter, the dancing queen of the skies, coming from the company which brought you the 1978 Car of the Year, Saab. The JAS-39 Gripen, or Gripen. Throughout the war, Ukraine has made use of dispersion tactics, operating their aircraft from temporary airfields, rear bases, and clandestine highway runways. They have to keep their aircraft set up in small units in very spare conditions scattered throughout western Ukraine to protect them from cruise missile attacks. Those cruise missile attacks did significant damage to the air defense in the initial stages of the invasion. And there is one country above all others in Europe, a country who has recently joined NATO, that has an extensive homegrown arms industry specializing in fighting the exact kind of war that Ukraine is currently fighting. In fact, not just kind of, but the exact war that they are fighting. The Kingdom of Sweden has been a semi-neutral nation in Europe for almost 2 centuries, weathering the storm of both World Wars and the Cold War without becoming entangled in the major power blocks of the globe. And the reason that they were able to maintain that independent neutrality is because they were largely self-reliant and very, very, very well armed. And they have defended their neutrality fanatically with those arms on more than one occasion. Many an RAF or 8th Air Force bomber met its end due to the Swedish air defense throughout World War II. But from 1945 to 1991, the largest threat to Sweden's national security was, of course, the Soviet Union. And to that end, the Swedish Defence Forces, in conjunction with Finland, have structured their arms manufacture, force composition, and overall defensive posture to meet a potential Soviet and now Russian invasion. But as with Ukraine now, albeit to a much lesser extent, when one looks at the balance of forces between Sweden and the Soviet Union, it becomes plainly obvious that should war have broken out between the two countries, the Red Air Force and Baltic Fleet would be in position to overwhelm the Swedish defences in a rather short time frame should they do battle in a conventional manner. So the Swedes decided, quite rightly and quite logically, just like the Ukrainians today, that they would not do battle in a conventional manner. They developed a war plan and air defense policy named BAS-60, which was later refined into BAS-90. The Swedes planned on dispersing their air force among as many bases as they physically could, operating from civilian highways, small local airports with short runways, and dispersed military airfields with airbase facilities spread out widely in camouflaged installations. The idea being that an attacking force would be unable to neutralize the Swedish air force on the ground in an initial strike, and that throughout the war, small units of aircraft could work in coordination with home defense militia units to defend a territory, while the professional army mobilized for local counterattacks. Now, where have we heard this before? And thus, Swedish fighter design prioritized the development of aircraft that could operate off very short runways in very harsh conditions, and most crucially of all, with very low maintenance requirements both in the operative sense and the personnel sense. The JAS-39 Gripen is the 4th generation product of this design philosophy, and has all the capabilities the Ukrainians require in a very effective and compact package. The Gripen is smaller than most fighters of the current era, and as such suffers a bit on range, but being the defenders, this isn't exactly a problem for the Ukrainians. And for that very small trade-off, the Gripen is fast, extremely agile, able to mix it up with the latest Russian designs in BFM, but that capability, while nice to have, is not what's really important. What is important with the Gripen is that it's equipped with the latest and greatest radar and data link systems capable of being hooked into NATO's network, operated by a fully digital cockpit. The level of situational awareness and combat capability available to the Ukrainian pilots would quadruple in quality upon the introduction of this fighter. And with these advanced sensors as well as data link, that would give the Ukrainians the ability to engage Russian aircraft in BVR, beyond visual range engagements, something they have not been able to do with any success as yet due to their lack of a Fox 3 active radar missile. And speaking of, the missile to go with the Gripen is almost as important as the aircraft itself. The MBDA Meteor missile is, from a fighter pilot's perspective at least, one of the most terrifying weapons developed in recent times. The Meteor is a long-range active radar missile capable of engaging targets at 110 nautical miles or 200 kilometers away, with a no-escape guaranteed kill range of 32 nautical miles or 60 kilometers away. Now granted, these are rough estimate figures, but suffice to say, that outranges and outperforms any missile the Russians can field to a considerable degree. The Meteor has a solid fuel ramjet, which allows the missile to change course, gain and reduce altitude, while still maintaining powered flight, as unlike other missiles of this type, it remains powered throughout its entire interception process, where conventional air-to-air missiles have an initial rocket motor which burns itself out after a short duration, meaning that any changes of course or range cannot be adjusted for by the missile itself without losing speed. So, when you combine that capability, and factor in the missile being powered by the advanced data link systems aboard the aircraft, when fired in track while scan mode, a Ukrainian Gripen could theoretically fire a missile from 50 miles away, and the Russian would only get warning when the missile goes active in its terminal phase 10 miles away. And due to the ramjet, the Meteor will simply increase power and follow him through any evasive maneuvers he makes, rendering escape almost impossible. And given that the Meteor has a terminal speed of over 4 times the speed of sound, he sure as hell can't outrun the thing. This high performance gradient also has another extra benefit to the Ukrainians. Due to the nature of the Gripen, it has a limited production run. It hasn't been widely produced, unlike a lot of the other NATO systems. And it would be primarily used in smaller numbers as a high performance stopgap until the main fighter bases can be established to support the primary future frontline fighter of Ukraine, which we will get to shortly. But due to this, they will still be considerably outnumbered, and the S-400 SAM is still a major threat. As such, low-level flying shenanigans will have to continue to maintain their survivability. Flying at low level, however, causes problems for missile range. Closer to sea level, air density is a lot higher, and as the Russians are flying combat air patrol at standard combat altitudes, engaging them with a conventional missile means the weapon has to go through thicker air and against the force of gravity to engage the target, meaning that the Ukrainian fighter has to get well within Russian weapon range way before they are able to fire. With the Meteor, however, due to the aforementioned range and speed from its powered flight profile, it performs far better fired from low altitude than other conventional missiles, making it ideal for Ukraine's needs. And of course, due to the Gripen's design, all of these weapons, the aircraft systems and components, can be completely maintained, repaired, restored, rearmed, turned around, and launched by a small team of 5 or 6 men per aircraft, with very little maintenance required per sortie, operating from short runways and highways. And of course, once the air defense threats have been dealt with, it too can put warheads on foreheads, leading into the next problem. With the deployment of the AGM-88 HARM aboard their legacy Soviet systems, and of course their potential employment from future deployed NATO types, the Ukrainians are able to suppress enemy air defense. But how do they go about destruction of enemy air defense? Given they are designed to shoot down aircraft, defeating them with standard conventional munitions puts the launch aircraft at risk. So, what's the answer? Well, what they need, ladies and gentlemen, is standoff.
Reach out and touch somebody. Reach out.
Some of you paying attention to the news coming out of Ukraine may even now be typing into the comments that ATACMS is already in play, and I would say that's probably a fair bet. Given the damage to the Russian airfields in Crimea at ranges that the Tochka, Excalibur, or the standard HIMARS munition can't reach. But it is yet to be officially confirmed, though the commander of Ukraine's armed forces did say that it was a Ukrainian missile attack that caused the damage seen here on screen, so make of that what you will. Knowing my luck though, they'll probably confirm it before I can release this video, so there is that. But suffice to say, ATACMS will definitely be crucial going forward in this war, as will air-launched cruise missiles, a capability the Russians have had the monopoly on thus far. The ATACMS, or Army Tactical Missile System, is fired from either HIMARS or the M270 MLRS, both of which the Ukrainians have. It is a tactical ballistic missile capable of mounting either a unitary blast fragmentation warhead or a cluster munition warhead. It is GPS INS guided and has an unclassified range of 190 nautical miles, or 300 kilometers, which it transits faster than 4 times the speed of sound. All of this is fancy military nerd talk, which I myself, as you've probably noticed, am frequently guilty of indulging. But, as we have most likely seen in Crimea, the utility of this weapon system is obvious. Ukraine has access to NATO intelligence and satellite data, or at least I am 99.9% sure they do. NATO can't confirm or deny it for obvious reasons. Frontline electronic warfare systems and their current airborne seed operations are also able to give real-time telemetry on where Russian radar emitters are likely to be. With ATACMS at their disposal, the Ukrainians will be able to hit frontline airfields and helicopter FARPs, as well as S-400 batteries, with a surface-to-surface strike, eliminating threats to their own air operations without risking their aircraft to do it. But as is often the case, a surface-launched missile does not have the mobility, range, and tactical flexibility required to carry out certain missions. For those, you need air-launched weapons. An air-launched cruise missile has numerous advantages, namely the ballistic properties afforded to them by the fact that they don't have to spend fuel and kinetic energy to climb to altitude and then travel to target. Furthermore, they generally have an inbuilt jet engine, allowing them to maintain their own flight path, follow waypoints, conduct coordinated swarm attacks from multiple bearings, and even fly nap of the Earth, just as their cousin the TLAM, the Tomahawk Land Attack Missile, does. The only major downside to an ALCM compared to ATACMS is the speed of the weapon. Being a ballistic system, the ATACMS transits and impacts the target faster than Mach 4. A cruise missile, by contrast, is subsonic, and therefore prone to intercept by SAM defenses or enemy fighters. That said, their smaller size and lower radar cross-section makes them harder to detect, with modern American systems having some stealth features built into the design. This is where the HARM comes into play. The HARM, as a seed weapon, is used to suppress the enemy SAMs by forcing them to shut off their search and acquisition radars, lest they get smacked by a volley of missiles. If used in conjunction with HARMs, which in a coordinated attack they almost certainly would be, ALCMs and other standoff weapons are able to track in on targets with a mitigated risk of interception. This was one of the main methods used by coalition forces during the Gulf War and Operation Iraqi Freedom, and if implemented properly, is catastrophically lethal. So, getting as many HARMs as possible to Ukraine is a priority. As for ALCMs, there are 2 available from the United States. First is the AGM-84 SLAM-ER, the most accurate and flexible missile currently available, with the exception of the other one we'll talk about. It has slightly less range than the ATACMS at 270 kilometers or 170 miles, but it has the beautiful ability of manual terminal guidance. The missile can fly to the target area following waypoints at a designated altitude, allowing it to evade known anti-air threats. Once it reaches the target area, it transmits a live camera feed to the launch aircraft of what the missile can see. The pilot can then manually select the target he wants the missile to hit by aiming the targeting sensor on the missile at the location where democracy is required. Bada bing, bada boom, kaboom, freedom delivered courtesy of your 2-week free trial of Prime. But, say you know where something is precisely. You've located it on satellite photos and have the exact GPS coordinates which you've got from an unknown, very kind and generous donor. All you need to do is program a missile and launch it. Well, Uncle Sam provides a capability for that too. The AGM-158 JASSM-ER. The AGM-158 is a GPS INS-guided ALCM with a range of 925 kilometers or 575 miles, capable of being launched from NATO 4th generation fighters. Simply put, if you know where the target is and the missile knows where it is because it knows where it isn't, you can destroy a target from over 500 miles away. And just like the Slam ER, it can follow waypoints, it can fly at low altitudes evading defenses, and guess what? It too has the option of terminal guidance. Though it's so damn accurate, you rarely need it. And the cool part is, Lockheed Martin are currently testing a variant which has a range of 1,900 kilometers, or 1,200 miles. And I'm sure if they wanted a field test, the Ukrainians would be more than happy to oblige. In any case, both the SLAM and the JASSM would offer the air forces of Ukraine a much-needed ALCM standoff capability, one that could be supplemented by the AGM-154 Joint Standoff Weapon, or JSOW, a 130-kilometer range stealthy weapon system that glides to the target after being released from high altitude, releasing a devastating payload of cluster munitions over a target area. Not so useful for S-400s, but for shorter-range SAMs such as the Tor, Buk, Pantsir, and Tunguska, this thing would be absolutely deadly. But there is one small problem. One that I'm sure you are now asking. Pac-Man, my guy. The Gripen is cool and all, but it doesn't have the payload capacity or the required systems integration to carry all these fancy toys. So how are they going to deploy them? Well, dear viewers, since we got past step 1, which as we all know is cut a hole in the box, we are now, assuming that all the other systems are in place and have worked, in a position to bring in the main event. The thing you have all been waiting for. From the wonderful township of Fort Worth, Texas, home of Aces High 3, the best combat flight sim ever made and my favorite game of all time, but more importantly, the General Dynamics aircraft production plant, I present to you what is this corporate dead naming bullshit? You change that title to the correct name of that aircraft right now. I don't care if that's what the military or the company calls it, it's still wrong. Change it immediately. Much better. You all knew this was coming. It's the obvious choice, and it's obvious for a reason. With over 4,000 airframes built, in service with 25 countries, modular, flexible, easy to modernize, and above all, highly capable in both air-to-air and ground attack, it is the aircraft best placed to provide Ukraine with both the numbers of aircraft required, as well as a modern and effective fighter able to employ the weapon systems required to turn the tide of this war decisively in Ukraine's favor. Designed in the 1970s as part of the Combat Fighter program to replace NATO's aging fleet of frontline fighters such as the F-4 Phantom and the F-104 Starfighter, the F-16 was a revolution in fighter aircraft design and one of, if not the greatest success in military aviation history, at least in modern times. The capabilities of this airframe are world-class even to this day, and while not as good as the Gripen, they are incredibly impressive. With a top speed of Mach 2, rated for sustained 9G turns, a greater than 1-to-1 power-to-weight ratio, a 324 degree per second roll rate, and an instantaneous turn speed that defies the laws of physics, allowing it to employ the lethal off-bore sight AIM-9X with vicious efficiency, the Viper is an absolute monster in within visual range combat. Its advanced digital flight computer combined with its partial delta wing design allow it to achieve angles of attack comparable to the flanker, while its small size, light weight, and high power allow it to regain kinetic energy much faster than most of its opponents. But of course, as we know, the reality of modern air combat is settled beyond visual range, and here too the F-16 is superior to its Russian counterparts in almost every respect. Due to the higher Mach numbers the Viper can achieve, their missiles have a higher initial speed on launch, extending their range and their lethality by a significant margin, which is crazy to consider because the missile the F-16 comes with is one of the fastest and most accurate missiles in the world today, its only superior being the aforementioned Meteor. The AIM-120 AMRAAM in its C and D variants have a range between 50 to 80 miles traveling at Mach 4 with data link integration and are a Fox 3 active radar missile. Its performance exceeds the comparable Russian R-77 series, as well as the various missiles in the R-27 Alamo family, which are semi-active and therefore require terminal guidance from the flanker that launches it. And speaking of data link, if properly integrated into the NATO data link system, and their AWACS flying on the edge of Ukrainian airspace, which would definitely not happen.
Look, are you trying to insinuate something?
No. Yes.
The Viper would have a complete digital display showing the entire battle space, friendly aircraft, bandits, bogies, and known SAM threats, which a Ukrainian Viper flight would be able to plan around and engage targets accordingly. But while all this is excellent for air-to-air capabilities, the Gripen and the Patriot are also capable of handling those threats for the most part. So while it's vital to have these, there are two other, more important reasons why a large fleet of Vipers is really the answer. And the first one is obvious. Say it with me, guys, one more time. Warheads on foreheads. The F-16 is capable of carrying all the air-launched standoff weapons mentioned in the previous chapter, which will aid in the degrading and the ultimate destruction of the Russian SAMnet. But once that threat is defeated, the F-16 can pivot from standoff to exterminate. From JSOWs to Mavericks to Paveways to JDAMs, the F-16 can carry an extensive payload of air-to-ground ordnance in tandem with advanced sensors, electronic warfare gear, jammers, and targeting pods. The sheer amount of Defense Department dimmer dollars this thing can dispense per minute is absolutely disgusting. Able to drop almost every single bomb in the NATO arsenal, and is probably adaptable enough to drop their older Soviet gear too. Given that Poland flies the F-16, they have almost certainly experimented with that, I'm sure, and the Poles would be perfectly happy to share. But it's that last sentence there which is the real reason, at least in my opinion, why the Viper is the choice. Everyone uses it. It's no secret that Ukraine, in raw numbers, is simply not going to be able to compete with Russia in the battle space. And learning a new fighter jet, how to fix it, operate it, fly it, maintain it, arm it, all the millions of technical, tactical, and logistical considerations required to operate a modern 4th generation fighter is months and months of work. We can't just simply park a squadron of F-16s in Kyiv tomorrow and say go. The reason why I say they should get Gripen first is precisely because it's designed to avoid all of the hurdles a normal conventional 4th gen platform has in its establishment phase. It can be operated by a pilot, a crew chief, and 4 conscript mechanics with 3 weeks training. An F-16 squadron, by contrast, takes thousands of personnel all along the line to get operating and then stay operating. But let me ask you something, dear viewers. Have you read your history books? I'm a history channel, so I'd say it's a fair question to ask, given my personal proclivities. But I'm going to tell you a tale from history. During the 1930s, the world was at war. Europe had a dark cloud hanging menacingly over it. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were preparing their campaigns of conquest as Spain collapsed into a brutal civil war. Japan, meanwhile, marched throughout Asia, using chemical and biological weapons on civilians, subjecting one of the oldest and proudest Chinese cities to what could be considered the worst singular atrocity in modern history. In all of these wars, however, there were young men and women who saw the darkness threatening mankind and simply said no. As Luftwaffe bombers flew towards London, Czechs, Poles, Frenchmen, Norwegians, and the famous American Eagle Squadron flew alongside the pilots of the British Commonwealth in defense of freedom. Swedish volunteers manned aging Brewster Buffaloes alongside their Finnish comrades as Soviet tanks rolled towards the Mannerheim Line. In the mountains of western China, a motley crew of American volunteers stared down the might of Imperial Japan, having painted their P-40s with the markings of an Australian fighter squadron because they thought it looked menacing. That would give them their name, the Flying Tigers. What I'm driving at is, the F-16 is flown by 25 air forces around the world, and the countries around the world that don't fly it have experience with similar systems on aircraft like the F-15, F-18, and F-35. By adopting NATO's most widely exported frontline fighter, it would open up the armories of the free world's air forces to give the Ukrainians what they need when they need it, and most vitally of all, it would act as a beacon for men and women of good conscience who know how to use them. The foreign legions of aviators and ground crew from times past can and should fly again, and I have a funny feeling there would be no shortage of volunteers. In any case, we've reached the end of this video. And normally I would close with my standard Slava Ukraina, or I would turn it over to President Zelensky. But since the liberation of Izium and Kupiansk, with Kherson soon to be next, I think now more than ever is a time to reflect on ourselves. The Ukrainians have proven they have the will and the ability to win this fight. They've proved it time and time again. The question that really matters now is, do you have the will to support them on their road to victory? And so, with that in mind, I will borrow the words of a great man who once had to ask that question of his people so very long ago.
My friends, this is not a fireside chat on war. It is a talk on national security, because the nub of the whole purpose of your president is to keep you now and your children later and your grandchildren much later out of a last-ditch war for the preservation of American independence and all of the things that American independence means to you and to me and to ours. The Nazi masters of Germany have made it clear that they intend not only to dominate all life and thought in their own country, but also to enslave the whole of Europe, and then to use the resources of Europe to dominate the rest of the world. It was only 3 weeks ago that their leader stated this: there are two worlds that stand opposed to each other. And then, in defiant reply to his opponents, he said this: others are correct when they say, with this world we cannot ever reconcile ourselves. I can beat any other power in the world. So said the leader of the Nazis. In other words, the Axis not merely admits, but the Axis proclaims that there can be no ultimate peace between their philosophy of government, and our philosophy of government. In view of the nature of this undeniable threat, it can be asserted properly and categorically that the United States has no right or reason to encourage talk of peace until the day shall come when there is a clear intention on the part of the aggressor nations to abandon all thought of dominating or conquering the world. Some of our people like to believe that wars in Europe and in Asia are of no concern to us. The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis. No man can tame a tiger into a kitten by stroking it. There can be no appeasement with ruthlessness. There can be no reasoning with an incendiary bomb. We know now that a nation can have peace with the Nazis only at the price of total surrender. The American appeasers ignore the warning to be found in the fate of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and France. They tell you that the Axis powers are going to win anyway, that all of this bloodshed in the world could be saved, that the United States might just as well throw its influence into the scale of a dictated peace and get the best out of it that we can. They call it a negotiated peace. Nonsense. Is it a negotiated peace if a gang of outlaws surrounds your community and on threat of extermination makes you pay tribute to save your own skins? For such a dictated peace would be no peace at all. It would be only another armistice, leading to the most gigantic armament race and the most devastating trade wars in all history. The history of recent years proves that the shootings and the chains and the concentration camps are not simply the trenchant tools, but the very altars of modern dictatorships. They may talk of a new order in the world, but what they have in mind is only a revival of the oldest and the worst tyranny. In that, there is no liberty, no religion, no hope. The proposed new order is the very opposite of a United States of Europe or a United States of Asia. It is not a government based upon the consent of the governed. It is not a union of ordinary, self-respecting men and women to protect themselves and their freedom and their dignity from oppression. It is an unholy alliance of power and pelf to dominate and to enslave the human race. I make the direct statement to the American people that there is far less chance of the United States getting into war if we do all we can now to support the nations defending themselves against attack by the Axis than if we acquiesce in their defeat, submit tamely to an Axis victory, and wait our turn to be the object of attack in another war later on. If we are to be completely honest with ourselves, we must admit that there is risk in any course we may take. But I deeply believe that the great majority of our people agree that the course that I advocate involves the least risk now and the greatest hope for world peace in the future. The people of Europe who are defending themselves do not ask us to do their fighting. They ask us for the implements of war, the planes, the tanks, the guns, the freighters, which will enable them to fight for their liberty and for our security. Emphatically, we must get these weapons to them. Get them to them in sufficient volume and quickly enough so that we and our children will be saved the agony and suffering of war which others have had to endure. Let not the defeatists tell us that it is too late. It will never be earlier. Tomorrow will be later than today. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. We must apply ourselves to our task with the same resolution, the same sense of urgency, the same spirit of patriotism and sacrifice as we would show were we at war. We have no excuse for defeatism. We have every good reason for hope. Hope for peace, yes, and hope for the defense of our civilization and for the building of a better civilization in the future. I have the profound conviction that the American people are now determined to put forth a mightier effort than they have ever yet made to increase our production of all the implements of defense to meet the threat to our democratic faith. As President of the United States, I call for that national effort. I call for it in the name of this nation which we love and honor, and which we are privileged and proud to serve. I call upon our people with absolute confidence that our common cause will greatly succeed.